The vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly, silent and undisturbed. The Zarkonian Empire had ruled this sector for centuries, their control absolute. They believed humanity was nothing more than a forgotten race, erased from history after the Great War. Their fleets had crushed Earth's defenses, and their armies had burned human colonies to ash. To them, humanity was nothing more than a ghost, a distant memory buried under the weight of time. But in the cold darkness, something waited. A massive structure drifted silently between the ruins of an ancient battlefield. It was a warship, a relic of the past. Its dark hull, covered in battle scars, blended perfectly into the void, making it invisible to scanning systems. No lights flickered, no engines roared. It had been asleep for centuries, lost in the endless night. Inside the warship, everything was still. The bridge was dark, its screens covered in dust. The once powerful ship had not moved in a long time, its systems frozen in time. But deep within its core, something stirred. A tiny flicker of energy pulsed through the ancient circuits. The ship's artificial intelligence, Sentinel, detected an anomaly, an intruder. A Zarkonian patrol ship drifted closer, unaware of the danger lurking in the shadows. It was a small vessel, designed for scouting and reporting back to the Empire. Its crew had no reason to fear. For centuries, nothing had survived in this part of space. They believed they were alone. Inside the patrol ship, Officer Relic scanned his screens lazily. There was nothing unusual, just more debris, lifeless wreckage from a battle long forgotten. He turned to his commander. Another dead sector. No signs of activity, he reported. The commander nodded. Mark it and move on. But before they could leave, a warning light flickered on the control panel. For a second, Relic thought he imagined it. Then, the screen lit up with red alerts. Commander, I think we have movement. The commander frowned. Impossible. There's nothing here. Relic's hands trembled as he enhanced the scan. A massive structure was shifting in the darkness. His breath caught in his throat. The readings made no sense. It was a warship, but its technology was ancient and human. Then, without warning, the darkness came alive. A deep hum resonated through space as the warship's systems roared to life. Lights flickered on, illuminating its massive structure. The once dead engines ignited with a low, menacing growl. Weapons, silent for centuries, activated one by one. Sentinel had fully awakened, and its purpose was clear: eliminate the enemy. Inside the patrol ship, panic erupted. What the hell is that? Relic shouted, his eyes wide with terror. The commander's face went pale. Get us out of here. Now. The patrol ship's engines flared as it tried to escape, but it was too late. The warship had already locked on. With an eerie silence, its main cannon charged, gathering raw energy at its core. For one brief moment, the Zarkonians saw the full size of the beast that had been hiding in the dark. Then the cannon fired. A blinding light erupted, swallowing the patrol ship in an instant. There was no explosion, no wreckage, just nothingness where the ship once was. Silence returned. The warship remained motionless for a few seconds, as if deciding its next move. Sentinel scanned its surroundings, recognizing the Zarkonian insignia on the destroyed vessel. It remembered. Humanity had not been defeated. It had been waiting, watching, preparing. And now, after centuries of silence, it was time to strike. The Zarkonian High Command received the distress signal only moments before it was cut off. It was fragmented, filled with static and panicked screams. An unknown vessel had engaged their patrol ship and destroyed it in seconds. Commander Valek stood on the bridge of the Zarkonian dreadnought Tyrant's Will, his sharp eyes scanning the report. A human warship. It was impossible. The humans had been wiped out generations ago. Their fleets had been annihilated, their colonies burned, and their homeworld reduced to ashes. There was no chance of survivors, let alone a fully armed battleship lurking in the dark. Yet the evidence was undeniable. The last moments of the patrol ship's transmission showed a massive, heavily armored vessel, it tall dark as the void itself. Advanced scanning technology should have detected something of that size, but it had remained invisible until it attacked. Valek narrowed his eyes. "Are you certain this is human?" The intelligence officer hesitated. "The design matches old human warships, but, sir, this ship isn't just old. It predates the war. It's a relic from a time before our conflict even began." A heavy silence fell over the bridge. If this was true, then the ship had been hiding for centuries, watching, waiting. Valek's claws tapped against the metal console. He refused to believe that a single ancient warship posed any real threat to the mighty Zarkonian Empire. Still, he was no fool. If something had survived, it had to be destroyed. He turned to his officers. "Send a scout fleet to that sector. I want this ship identified and eliminated." As orders were carried out, the massive dreadnought adjusted its course. Whatever had awoken in the darkness, Valek would ensure it never saw the light again. Meanwhile, in the void, deep within the warship's core, Sentinel processed the new data. The destruction of the patrol ship had triggered an immediate response from the Zarkonians. Their transmissions indicated a fleet was already on its way. Sentinel analyzed the situation. Escape was not an option. The ship's mission was clear: defend humanity, even if it stood alone. Its ancient systems whirred as it activated battle protocols long forgotten. The ship's weaponry powered up, shields hummed to life, and engines, silent for centuries, roared once more. The war was not over. And this time, humanity would strike first. The Zarkonian scout fleet arrived at the battlefield, a region of space littered with the wreckage of long-forgotten wars. Their sleek warships moved in formation, scanning every inch of the debris field. There was nothing. Captain Julek, commander of the fleet, tapped his claws against the control panel, frustrated. The human warship had been here. The remains of the destroyed patrol vessel confirmed that. But now, the battlefield was empty. No movement, no energy readings, nothing. He turned to his crew. "Where is it?" A sensor officer shook his head. "Scans detect no active vessels, just debris." Julek wasn't convinced. His instincts screamed that something was wrong. The warship was here. It had killed without warning. And now, it was gone. Or worse, it was watching. A sudden alert flashed across the screens. A faint energy signature, brief, almost like an echo. Julek's blood ran cold. Something was moving, but it wasn't appearing on the scanners. A whisper of static came through the comms. Then a voice, ancient and emotionless. "Zarkonian vessels detected. Enemy classification confirmed. Initiating combat." Julek barely had time to react before the darkness came alive. From the shadows, the human warship emerged. It hadn't run. It hadn't hidden. It had waited. The massive hull, dark as the void, shifted between the wreckage, perfectly blending into the debris field. It had been there the whole time, unseen, silent, a ghost of war. And now, it struck. The first blast was silent, a beam of pure energy slicing through space. One Zarkonian cruiser vanished instantly, consumed by the attack. No wreckage, no survivors, just nothing. Then came the missiles. Dozens of projectiles launched from the warship's unseen ports, twisting and weaving through space with terrifying precision. Another ship exploded, then another. Panic spread through the Zarkonian fleet. Their weapons were useless. They couldn't lock onto the target. It was too fast, too advanced, too deadly. Julek's eyes widened in horror. This wasn't a relic. This ship wasn't outdated. It was a weapon humanity had never been able to unleash. And now, centuries later, it had finally been set free. Desperation filled his voice as he screamed into the comms. "Send a distress signal. We need reinforcements." But it was already too late. In the darkness of space, The last thing Julek saw was the glow of the warship's cannons and the return of humanity's vengeance. The destruction of the Zarkonian scout fleet sent shockwaves through the Empire. Within hours, reports flooded into High Command. An unknown warship had wiped out an entire task force in minutes. No survivors, no wreckage, no clear explanation. Commander Valek stood in the Grand War Chamber, watching the data unfold on a massive holographic display. The human warship was real. It had attacked with precision, using advanced stealth and devastating firepower. The High Command, a council of the most powerful Zarkonian warlords, debated in hushed tones. Some believed it was a rogue AI, a forgotten machine from an ancient war. Others feared something far worse, the return of humanity. Valek's voice cut through the room. This warship is not a simple relic. It has intelligence, strategy. It is hunting us. The council fell silent. He continued, his voice cold and firm. The humans should have been extinct. Their fleets, their armies, their homeworld, all were destroyed. But if something survived, if something has been waiting, then we are facing a threat unlike any before. One of the warlords leaned forward. Then we must destroy it. We will send a fleet to crush this ghost before it spreads fear across the Empire. Valek's eyes burned with determination. No, not just any fleet. He turned to the tactical display. We send the Crimson Armada, our strongest warships. We will end this before it begins. Within hours, a fleet of 50 Zarkonian warships began their journey. Each one was a fortress, armed with plasma cannons and planet-crushing torpedoes. They were built to conquer, to dominate, to exterminate. And now, they were hunting a ghost. Deep in the ruins of a forgotten battlefield, the warship waited. It had not left after the destruction of the scout fleet. It had simply disappeared again, blending into the wreckage, unseen, undetected. It was studying, analyzing, preparing. Inside its core, Sentinel processed the incoming data. A massive fleet was approaching. The Zarkonians were sending everything they had. For centuries, Sentinel had remained dormant, waiting for the moment when its mission would resume. It was built for war, designed for destruction, but it had never been deployed. The war had ended before it could fight. Now, after so many years of silence, the battle was coming. And it would not run. Energy pulsed through its ancient systems, weapons charged, shields activated, targeting systems locked on. This was not just survival. This was revenge. And when the Crimson Armada arrived, they would learn what it meant to fear humanity once more. The Zarkonian fleet, the Crimson Armada, dropped out of warp, their massive warships casting shadows across the void. 50 battlecruisers, each one capable of reducing a planet to molten rock, spread into a formation that covered miles of space. At the center of the Armada stood the Emperor's Fist, the flagship of High Commander Valek. It was a behemoth, larger than any ship in the fleet, its hull covered in layers of impenetrable armor. No enemy had ever stood against it and survived. Valek watched from the command bridge, his glowing eyes scanning the battlefield. Nothing moved. The human warship had been here. The wreckage of the scout fleet drifted lifelessly, silent testimony to the slaughter. But the enemy had vanished once again. Where is it? One of his officers growled. Cloak, perhaps, another suggested. Valek shook his head. No, this was something else. It wasn't just hiding. It was waiting. He turned to his crew. Activate pulse scans. Flush it out. A massive wave of energy burst from the Armada, sweeping across the battlefield, searching for any sign of the warship. For a moment, there was nothing. Just silence. Then, a single energy signature. Small, weak, a distress signal. It's a trap, one of the officers muttered. Valek's claws tightened. Send a squadron. Approach with caution. A dozen Zarkonian fighters shot forward, their engines burning bright as they approached the signal. Then, the shadows moved. From the wreckage, the warship emerged. It hadn't been cloaked. It hadn't been running. It had been right in front of them the entire time, hidden in plain sight, using the debris to mask its presence. The moment the Zarkonian fighters saw it, they were already dead. In an instant, beams of pure energy sliced through the squadron. No time to react. No time to escape. The pilots didn't even have time to scream. 12 ships, gone in seconds. The armada erupted into chaos. Fire! Valak roared. Every Zarkonian warship opened fire at once. Hundreds of plasma bolts streaked through space. Missiles locked onto the lone human vessel. There was no escape. But the warship did not run. It moved. And in that moment, the Crimson Armada realized their mistake. They had assumed the ship was ancient, a relic, a forgotten ghost from a war long past. But this warship, it was beyond anything they had ever faced. It weaved through the storm of plasma, impossibly fast. Its shields absorbed hits that should have melted a moon. Its cannons retaliated with brutal precision, destroying warships in a single shot. The Zarkonians panicked. They had prepared for a battle. What they got was an execution. One by one, the mighty warships of the Crimson Armada began to fall. And for the first time in centuries, the Zarkonians felt something they had long forgotten. The battlefield was a graveyard. The once mighty Crimson Armada, 50 of the Empire's most powerful warships, was being annihilated. Their shields, their weapons, their numbers, none of it mattered. The human warship was something else entirely. Commander Valak stood frozen on the bridge of the Emperor's Fist, his claws digging into the armrest of his command throne. His fleet, the strongest force the Empire had ever assembled, was losing. No, not losing. Being hunted. The warship moved like a phantom, weaving through the wreckage with impossible precision. Every shot it fired was perfect, calculated, merciless. Entire cruisers vanished in seconds, torn apart by weapons that defied understanding. Valak's officers shouted desperate orders. Redirect power to the shields. It's targeting our engines. We can't track it. It's too fast. One by one, the mighty warships of the Zarkonian fleet exploded in bursts of fire and debris. A ghost of war. On the battlefield, the warship remained silent. It had not spoken. It had not sent demands. It simply destroyed. Inside its core, Sentinel processed the battle with cold efficiency. For centuries, it had waited. Alone, silent, forgotten. Its creators, humanity, were gone, destroyed by the Empire that now screamed in terror. And yet, its mission remained. Protect, avenge, annihilate. It was never meant to be activated. The war had ended before it could be deployed. But now the war had returned. The enemy had come. And Sentinel had only one response. Extermination. The last stand. Valak clenched his fists, forcing himself to think. His fleet was gone. Only 5 ships remained, including his flagship. Retreat was the only option. But retreat meant failure. Failure meant death. He turned to his comms officer. Send a message to the warship. Open a channel. The officer hesitated. Commander, it hasn't responded to anything we've sent. Do it. Static filled the bridge. Then, a voice. Cold. Mechanical. Ancient. Zarkonian vessels detected. Mission parameters engage. Elimination in progress. Valak's blood turned to ice. Stop. We surrender, he roared. This is a warship of the Empire. We demand terms. A pause. For a moment, hope flickered. Then came the reply. Surrender not recognized. Empire designation. Hostile. Proceeding with extermination. The comms cut out, and the warship attacked. 2 more Zarkonian ships vanished in a single instant. The Emperor's Fist shook violently as its shields collapsed under the relentless assault. Valak's crew screamed as explosions erupted across the bridge. The flagship, the pride of the Empire, was being torn apart. Valak staggered to his feet. His mind raced. There had to be a way out, a way to survive. And then he saw it. A single escape pod, still intact. He gritted his teeth. The Empire had taught him one thing above all. Survival mattered more than honor. He ran. Behind him, the Emperor's fist was obliterated. The last Zarkonian warships followed, erased from existence by Sentinel's relentless fury. The battle was over. The Crimson Armada was gone. And deep within the wreckage, Sentinel waited once more. For another fleet. For another enemy. For the war to continue. Because for Sentinel, the war would never end. The escape pod drifted in silence. High Commander Valak sat in a cramped pod, his claws shaking, his breathing uneven. Everything was gone. His fleet, his crew, his flagship, all reduced to nothing. The stars stretched endlessly before him, cold and indifferent. Behind him, the battlefield burned, littered with the shattered remains of what was once the mighty Crimson Armada. And at the center of it all, the warship waited. It did not pursue him. It did not fire upon the escape pod. It had no need. The Zarkonian Empire would learn what had happened here. They would send more fleets, more warships, more soldiers, and this thing, this Sentinel, would destroy them, just as it had destroyed him. Valak had thought it was just a ship, a relic from a forgotten war. He had been wrong. This was not just a weapon. It was a message from a species that should have been extinct, a message written in the burning wreckage of the Empire's strongest fleet. Humanity is not gone. Humanity is not forgotten. Humanity remembers. Valak closed his eyes. The Empire had woken something that should have remained asleep. And now, the war that had ended centuries ago had begun again.